came out of a certain journey I've had in teaching students prayer. So we'll go through it. Again, I think you could do, depends on how much time you have. Again, I wouldn't have too much. Are we recording again?
Yeah.
Okay, I wouldn't have too much predetermined timeline of how far you're going to get. Get as far as you get, right? But the goal, again, we start with the theology of prayer, which is really vision for prayer, the two sides of prayer, if you will. And you have this triangle, which is going to be helpful for you, which I made up. As I was thinking through prayer, it kind of seemed to be a helpful kind of diagram for me. And then we'll talk about place and posture in prayer, which is interesting. And then some ideas in prayer, which and then under ideas of prayer, again, this probably should be moved to the F's of prayer, above ideas for prayer. So let me again walk you through this. So basically on this one, on prayer, the first part is about filling in the triangle. And what I do is have them put on either side, like one side I'll have them write intimacy, and the other side I'll have them write causality. So you guys can go ahead and write that. Intimacy and causality, I'll explain what causality is in a second. And how there's really two sides of prayer that people tend to be on. On one side of prayer is the people who focus just on the intimacy, like how it, let me take it in order here. They focus more on it works, right? This idea, like if you pray, when you pray, things happen, which is true. The Bible obviously talks about that, but it starts to become where prayer loses its relational context when people talk about that. It's true and profoundly true, but almost where it's like if you say the right thing enough, then it's like you pull the handle of the slot machine and the answer comes out, and then the healing happens, and so it's where it starts to become very impersonal. It's about making your way through the prayer list because you got to mention everything, and the focus is so much on the causality that the relational is missed. And so basically, as you I see two errors that people often have in their prayer life. One is they focus so much on the causality they miss the relational. And so there's some verses that I refer to about how we receive the spirit of sonship, and by Him, by the Spirit, we cry out, Abba, Father. And that talk a little bit about the language of Abba. Abba is the most intimate term that you could use in that. It was household language. You wouldn't use Abba outside of the immediate family kind of household. Does that make sense? It's like it's like dad, not even really daddy. It's like that. It's the dada language it's so profoundly intimate, and the Spirit within us is calling out dada. And it's almost feels weird to even say that, right? Daddy, this extremely intimate language that is used of what the Spirit does and draws us to the Father in this way. And it's in that posture we come to the Father. We come to our daddy, our Papa Daddy, Abba Father, right? And I remember when I was discipling a guy, and we'd always close in prayer, and he's like, Dad, thanks for that, Dad. And it always made me a little bit like, that's different. But it was really profound. That's the way he would approach God in prayer when we'd close out our one-on-ones, and obviously even beyond that. And the point is we don't want to turn prayer, focus on the causality so much, we're just turn it into getting through our prayer list if we can say the right things, and it's almost incantational. I mean, people don't use that language, but if you can kind of pray the right thing over that person, then it's going to release the miracle if you claim it right, kind of. It's like, no, it's actually born out of relationship. Then there's the other side that somebody needs. In fact, who was I talking to recently? Oh, just this past week I was having a conversation with somebody about this, about how we should pray. Oh, yeah, I remember who it was. We should pray for God's kingdom to come. The now and not yetness. We should pray for the now, that we experience the now, right? That's what Jesus tells us, pray thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And he's like, yeah, he said, I'm around people who it's like, every time they pray, they just want to like, if it be your will, and kind of give God every out, and it's kind of like those people pray for comfort more than for healing. They pray for hope more than breakthrough. Does that make sense? It's like they focus on the intimacy of prayer, but in the meantime, they don't have much expectation that something's really going to happen. And so you have these two sides of prayer, and the point of this triangle is this. And so then I have some verses about where Paul just profoundly says that he believes he's going to be delivered as they help him by their prayers. Like, I mean, when you read Paul in 2 Corinthians and in Philippians, like, you will hear him. Let me actually turn to the Philippians passage, because I don't see it in my notes here, but I'll give you the reference on that. But listen to what Paul says when he speaks of prayer. He says this in verse 9 and 10, yes, and I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and the help given by the Spirit of Jesus, what happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. How is he confident of his deliverance? Because of the prayers of the people. He's confident he'll be delivered. Because he believes in the causality of prayer. Prayer makes a difference. God answers prayers. That 2 Corinthians passage, on him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us as you help us by your prayers. Paul is continually appealing to the fact that our prayers are consequential. And so the goal is that we help people as we teach them about prayer to embrace both simultaneously, that the height of prayer is when you understand that there's causality and intimacy. It's not like you're on either side of the pyramid, but the two come together in our prayer lives into embracing both of those vigorously. Does that make sense? So there's an outside-in aspect of it's relational and transforming to the person who prays, but there's also an inside-out aspect that our prayers have a causality in the world through God answering them. And so when you talk to somebody about prayer, you'll notice where they're at on the side, oftentimes. Hopefully you'll notice they're in the middle. But oftentimes it'll sound like this, well, sometimes God doesn't calm the storm, but he calms his child. That kind of language, right? And that's true. Sometimes he does. But that doesn't give us, we shouldn't lose an ability to pray with faith and really expect to see God work. I was talking to Josh this past week about Levi, who prays a very simple prayer that God was answering his prayer. I'm like, that's awesome. What a great way to be introduced to prayer, and the childlike faith. Yeah, I prayed, God did it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a cool example. So, anyways, I want to see those two come together. There's an article out of God and Doc called Work and Prayer by C.S. Lewis that you guys should have a copy of. That is a fantastic, it's 4 pages in the book, and it's probably just from the back of your, that is one of the best little articles on prayer you'll ever read. Lewis man. So I have our guys read it and we talk about it. I don't necessarily read it as a group. I have done that before. You can do it however you want, but talk about it because it brings, I think where our people struggles, does prayer really make a difference oftentimes? And it does talk about the high form of causality that prayer is, but it does it in a way that is just very intellectually satisfying, if you will. So not in a name and claim it kind of way, but it's powerful kind of way. So, all right. And then the next thing I talk about is place and posture in prayer. And this I heard Andy Stanley do a message on this one time that Jesus tells his disciples where to pray before he teaches them how to pray. And so in Matthew chapter 6, verse 5, he tells them to go into their prayer closet. Basically, and when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen, that your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. It's this idea that before he tells them how to pray, he tells them where to pray. And then, when you read through the scriptures over and over again, you see Jesus go into a solitary place, go into a solitary place, go into a solitary place. That place seems to matter in some way. I'm not trying to over spiritualize it, but it's human, right? That we need to be in a place that's conducive to prayer. And what do you do when you have roommates, right? So talking to people, well, how can you get a time to meet with the Lord, and a place to meet with the Lord, kind of that, So I deal with that, and frankly, I'm just going to ask them, so where is your solitary place? Where's your lonely place? Where's the place that you can get alone and be with God? Oftentimes, prayer lives these days, and maybe it's always been, but it's I pray on my way to class. Great. We should pray without ceasing. That's great. One metaphor I use periodically, it's not in the notes here, but is the difference between eating at the drive-thru and eating at a 5-star restaurant with a white tablecloth. Well, it's good to eat at a drive-thru because it's better than not eating at all. But there are times where you just need to sit at the white tablecloth dinner, relax, enjoy the company, right? And just feast together. And hey, I'm all for praying on the way to class. I would never discourage somebody from praying on their way to class. But I also think that what we see in Jesus is, I have no doubt that he prayed throughout his day, but we also see him having times where he just gets alone and goes to his lonely place, his solitary place, and spends time with his Father. Does that make sense? That he also had white tablecloth times as he also had drive-thru times. Does that make sense? And of course, there's a lot you can extrapolate on what your experience like when you go to a drive-thru. You don't even remember what you ate most of the time. So in our devotional life as a whole, we need white tablecloth times sometimes. And sometimes drive-thru is all we got time for, and drive-thru is better than no food at all. All right, so it's no condemnation. Anyways, so that's just trying to encourage them to have a place and think through where can they meet with the Lord, and having a time set aside versus just always doing the drive-through prayers. The intimacy of the communion is different. Okay? And then on posture, you guys have heard me talk about this before, that if I could give somebody one tip for their prayer life, I would not teach them what to say. I would teach them the posture to have during their prayer. And that's radical. It's in our day, because our culture says what you do with your body doesn't matter. We're basically Gnostics. Your body doesn't matter. It's just your internal events that matters. It's a new form of Gnosticism, and But you know what? If I can teach you how to kneel before the Lord, when you kneel, that posture brings you into a certain posture of heart before God. If you lay on your face before God, bow before Him, raise your hands in surrender before Him or adoration before Him, whatever the case may be in the moment. If you will learn to engage your bodies, and here's the thing, Christianity is, I would say modern day, because even liturgical Christianity understands that your posture matters. That's why they have kneelers in liturgical churches, right? Because they understand to engage your body matters. But modern day evangelicals, the only thing that matters as long as you raise your hands and it hits the bridge. This electric guitar comes in really strong. But every other religion, posture matters in prayer. You go to the Wailing Wall, you'll see people taking the same posture and rocking in prayer at the Wailing Wall. You go to a mosque, you'll see people getting down, bowing, putting their head to the ground. I'm not saying that they're right in who they're praying to, but the point is when your body, your mind, and your emotions are all bent in the same direction, it matters. And for you to, now, there may be times you're on a bus ride, you can't get in the posture. I'm not trying to over spiritualize this, but what I do want to do is encourage people that I disciple to toy around with their postures. And my bet is if they pace when they're in warfare kind of prayer, or praying for a breakthrough, or if they're on their knees in dependence before God, or if they're lifting their hands on their knees in adoration or bowing before the Lord when they're listening to worship music and worshiping God, I can almost guarantee you that there will be something that breaks through in their heart because our bodies matter. And you just won't find much said about this in these days. But in the Psalms you find it, don't you? Let us kneel before the maker of heaven and earth. You know, we are the sheep of his pasture, right? Like, I mean, to lift up holy hands before the Lord. And I mean, the Psalms aren't void of it, but they're just not as enlightened. And so we worship God with our hands. So the point is I try to get people to use their body and to experiment. That it will take them deeper in their prayer if they will engage their body, versus sitting at their desk in their chair with their computer screen in front of them and pray, which we've all done, right? And how many people would say that wasn't one of your best prayer times, right? So, you know, it wasn't until about 6 or 8 years ago I started really paying attention to my posture, and maybe out of my lack, I needed it. Maybe I said where I was that I don't know, but I needed it. It's mattered. Okay. And then one-on-one ideas for prayer. This is where the order should be different. Again, I'm casting vision for prayer. Like has intimacy and causality, and bringing those two together. We hold both of those simultaneously. That's vision stuff, right? And then you bring them to a certain point where you're looking at means. This is where, if you keep going, the 3 F's of prayer, where are they at? Are they?
At the bottom of the sheet.
Point 3.
Oh, under one-on-one ideas? Man, what a terrible location for that. That should really go up more in the vision stuff. So we'll reformat that a bit. But this probably should go actually after the triangle. But this is off of the Luke 18 parable that you guys didn't want me to preach on this semester. Of the 3 F's of prayer, one, that we should pray with frequency, that it says this, that Jesus told them in this parable that they would pray and not give up, right? And I felt this when I prayed for Dubai, when I prayed for the ministry center. Like, okay, no, Jesus tells me to keep coming. Keep it coming at me. Be relentless. Be that persistent widow. Just keep badgering me in prayer. That's what Jesus tells us to do. And we're, like, well, I prayed 3 times. I've already prayed that. Like we can get in that mentality so easy. And Jesus says, no, keep asking. And then with fervency, again, this challenges our enlightenment mindset, where it talked about how with let me turn to the parable. I'm trying to do it from memory here, but it's Luke 18. Loud cries is quoting Jesus. And when you read about Jesus' prayer in Hebrews, it says, with loud cries, he cried out. So Jesus wasn't praying little quiet prayers in his head. I think it's talking about him in the Garden of Gethsemane. But in other words, his heart and his emotions were thoroughly engaged. And so when he teaches about prayer, he talks about the woman. This is what he says about her. She kept coming to him with a plea, grant me justice against my adversaries. Then, this widow keeps bothering me. Eventually she'll wear me out. Okay, then, and will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Cry out. I mean, that's like from the depth of here. It's like, I heard one time somebody say, you haven't started praying until you're desperate. Like, you cry out when you're desperate, right? And there's this picture of like, do we pray with a fervency? Or do we pray with a formality? And I'm not against formal at times, but I mean, there should be a fervency in our spirit that when Jesus taught on prayer, like, to those who cry out, will he deny justice? Who please? Like, there's a, and again, Rigo's tradition probably could teach us something on prayer, like coming from South America. There's probably a different fervency in the prayer of people from South America. Am I right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you go to in my experiences, when I would go to cultures that that are not as prosperous as ours, there's a different fervency in their prayer. There's a desperation in their prayer, and so that fervency, and then frequency, fervency, and then full of faith. The parable ends with the Son of Man. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Will people keep praying and believe he makes a difference? Like, when the Son of Man comes back, will he find people just praying and believing he might make a difference? And if I can get people to pray fervently, full of faith frequently, man, I think they're having a vital prayer life. I think we'd all look at ourselves and say, does that define my prayer life? Sometimes I can say, not so much. Sometimes maybe, yeah. Another time, And I'm not trying to spiritualize emotions and tears. I'm just saying, when we come to become all we are before the Lord. So, make sense? Mm-hmm. And then how to help people with prayer. And this is practice. So Acts prayer plan. I don't know where you guys know the Acts prayer plan. I don't need to teach you the Acts prayer plan, right? True. And then the planning for weekend prayer. What happened to my? I thought I had my calendar here. Because that planning a weekend prayer is probably one of the most consequential tools that I have used to help people in their prayer life. And probably because it's been one of the most consequential tools in my own prayer life. Where is it? It's not here. I thought I brought it in, but I didn't. Have you guys seen how to plan a weekend prayer? It's a little chart. It's on the web. We need to get that in there too. But it's where you take a theme of the day that you pray for, and you kind of chart your course in prayer. And anyways, I've helped many of my guys plan a week's prayer. It's a great one-on-one if you ever need a good one-on-one of planning a prayer calendar. And it's amazing, some of my guys that I ended up mentoring, I remember Taylor and Barrett, when they were fourth years, I was asking them what they do for their prayer life, because I want to make sure their prayer life was vital. It's been 3 years since they've been in a discipleship group. Both of them like, yeah, I use that prayer calendar you taught us. That's when you know it's consequential to go over, right? Whenever a few years later, as something that they're using actively to help them in their prayer. So, anyways, it just kind of gives you some categories to brainstorm of things you need to pray for, because the idea being that if you just try to go through the list every day, you'll get fatigued of just going through the list. It'll start to feel rote. You can't camp out on anything. But if you divide it up, today I'm praying for family, tomorrow I'm praying for ministry, the next day I'm praying for missions, or whatever the case may be, then you can really press in with a different degree of fervency and And then there's certain things you're gonna pray for every day, you know, does that make, just to help you when you say, yeah, I'll pray for that you actually pray for it, right? Which we all need help with, I'm sure. So I don't teach prayer from any ivory tower, I can tell you that. But, are there any questions? That's a very quick overview of prayer, but. So if you go through the Acts prayer plan, if you go through praying through a week and look up the parable, this will definitely be an hour. It could be more. I don't know. Whatever you choose. However you look. Okay. All right. Well, I'm done. I guess we'll bring in the next person.